Welcome to Flip My Future podcast, hosted by Bradley and Michelle Dorsey. This show's packed with actionable tips, inspiring stories, and expert advice for flipping houses and building wealth. Whether you're a seasoned investor or just getting started, there's something here for everyone. Let's flip your future.
Hi, and welcome to the Flip My Future podcast. I'm your host, Bradley Dorsey. Today, I have an amazing guest. He has tons of experience in real estate, pretty much every area. He's been very involved in lending. He's flipped a ton of houses. He's super involved in the construction aspect, pretty much everything. He actually used to be the owner of a large hard money lending company, Anchor Loans. So we'll talk to him a little bit about that. But today, we want to ask you a lot of questions about flipping houses, give some tips and tricks on how people can get started if they're new or if they're just, aspiring real estate investors and stuff like that. But Robert, welcome to the show. And I would love for you just to tell us a little bit about yourself and we'll go from there.
All right, Bradley, thanks for having me. I appreciate that. I'm excited to be here. And a little bit about my background. I actually got started almost 35 years ago now. Actually, I think this year is my 35th year, which is just totally crazy because I remember being the youngest kid around, especially when you go networking. And now I'm like, I just went to a networking event and I hadn't really been going to a lot of networking events. I went to one and I was literally, I think, the oldest guy there. Right? And I'm like, crap. So it's fun to see the progression. It's fun to see how things have changed, and the excitement around the industry right now is I think elevated because there's so many gurus because of the internet now that everyone wants to kind of get out there and teach other people how to do it. And it's I think one of the greatest things about this business is that there are so many mentors that are out there that you can learn from that are active investors. And like myself, I got taught by someone who was doing it. I've always embodied that and have been very, very open about teaching people how to do things because it's the way I got started. So I think that's just generational, just continues to happen. And as new people come in, they should learn what not to do as well.
Yeah, that's amazing, Robert. And there's going to be a lot of people out there that you talk about having 35 years of experience, and people are going to. How do you ever get to that point? Like.
I asked myself that question too.
So there's gonna be a lot of new people though that they can look at you and be okay, well he can do this and he can be successful as a house flipper or as a home remodeler or whatever because he has all of this experience. There's people that are just getting started. Maybe they don't know how to get in the business. They don't have any financing. They just how would you tell somebody starting from zero? How would you get started?
Well, listen. I mean, I was 17 years old. I was a senior in high school when I got started, and it was just a chance meeting. I was sitting at a Burger King. My best friend and I were literally just people watching, at a mall, and the guy next to me had a bunch of flyers, and one of the flyers said, buy houses with no money down. So I'm a little bit of a smart ass. And I looked at him like, well, hey, I have no money. Sell me a house. And the guy looked at me straight and he goes, it's easier to buy a house than it is a car. And I just bought a car. And so I was like, all right, well, tell me about it. I had an uncle who did well in real estate and he was more of an apartment building guy. And so I heard him out and he invited me down to a seminar. He said, look, you can come down for free. He goes, just help me set up, come down, show up at 6 a.m. And I did that and learned it. And I was like, well, this seems pretty easy. It can't be that easy. So I went out and just started door knocking. And I found him, I think, either 3 or 4 houses that first month. And he's like, well, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm just knocking on their doors. He's like, oh, all right. And that works for you? I'm like, I don't know. You tell me. Does it work? Because I didn't know if that was, I had no metrics. But I had, same thing, you had no money. And basically the best thing that happened was I found a mentor who was willing to, basically teach me and tell me what to do and what I should be saying and tweak that a little bit. Once I had a little bit of success with that, I started reading sales books, psychology books, kind of reading body language type books so that I could hone my sales skills, which I think that is probably a lost art for a lot of people is that, especially when they're getting to flipping, they're so worried about trying to, find the deal and they work on the data and all of this other stuff that they don't realize that their biggest, adversary is themselves if they're not very good closers. If they don't understand personalities and how to understand or connect to those different types of personalities, then their closing rate is going to be reduced significantly.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And I think that, like you were saying, so many people that want to get involved in real estate. I think it's great to read as many books as you can, learn from people, learn from other mentors. Personally, I think. I grew up in Texas and I was around a lot of people that were in real estate investing, developing, building houses, construction. I grew up in the construction business and we would work in, houses for other investors and, home builders. And I always wanted to get involved in either building houses or flipping houses, But honestly, you know, I didn't think it was possible. Like, you know, I didn't have enough money. You know, I didn't have a big enough savings account. I didn't think my credit was good enough. And the crazy thing is, I went so many years without actually even exploring the possibility of doing something because I just did not think that I could. So I held off. And then, you know, one day, you know, several years ago now, but you know, we just decided, hey, we're going to start making offers on properties. And we did, honestly, not knowing how we were going to fund it or anything. And then I started learning about hard money. I started, you know, realizing that we could bring in outside partners on our projects and split profits with them. And it was just, you know, it was amazing that we were able to use the property as a collateral. So like you said, it's actually easier to get a loan on a house than it is on a car a lot of the time. And people don't realize that. Right. And when you're flipping a house, you buy something that you're going to be able to increase value, you're going to be able to actually make a profit, you know, and then you can do this, you know, rinse and repeat over and over and over. And that's how you build net worth. It's how you increase your net worth. It's also how you can get involved in, you know, purchasing rental properties and doing something that's going to create, you know, long-term, what people call mailbox money, the reoccurring income, which is, you know, what we're doing now. We started flipping, but we're using those profits to buy other investment properties, vacation rentals, things that are bringing, you know, income on a monthly basis back to us. And we're also getting the appreciation in those properties. So I love it. Love what you're doing. And again, another thing I would just point out is, you know, going to networking events, going to real estate meetups. I think that's incredibly important because that's how you can meet people like yourself.
Well, listen, with Anchor, we built Anchor largely on networking, you know, and it's in fact, I remember giving a class to one of the real estate groups on networking because I never went to a networking event without leaving with business. And there's a very specific way, if you're very intentional about your networking, you can get all of the business that you want out of it without spending as much money as other people spend advertising or having other sales reps. So we got up to, I don't know, probably $500 million a year in fundings without advertising at all at Anchor. And it was almost all just networking, marketing, and then word of mouth through that. But not so much marketing our services, marketing either different events, meeting people, and you know, we would invite like almost everyone, and especially everyone that we wanted to do business with. Now, the people that showed up, they showed up, and we knew they were there to do business with us. So at that point, it was kind of a qualifier, and so most of the networking events were very, very profitable. Like the actual networking event is the culmination of all of the marketing that you did to get there, and so when you show up, you've got people to network with instead of showing up and meeting a bunch of random people, just asking them for their business cards, and then you do nothing with it. The people that show up that you've invited, they're there to do business with you. Right. And so from that standpoint, that's I think a key difference from being very intentional and you know, directing your networking for a purpose versus just hey, let's see what happens.
Right. So, you know, I've been to several real estate meetups and stuff like that, and the thing that I've noticed is you have some people that are going to show up, you know, every week, you know, every month, whenever they have these events, that are probably actually never going to do real estate business. Right. They just keep showing up, and then you have other people that actually take the action steps necessary to, you know, get involved in investing in real estate. And, you know, they actually use those as opportunities, like you said, to meet other people and create partnerships and win-win situations with lenders, maybe with another contractor, whatever that may be. The first real estate meetup that I went to here in California was back in 2019. And I went, and it was a regular group that had been meeting for, you know, probably 15 years at the same location. My wife and I went, and what was really interesting is you could tell there were certain people that they would just come every week. And then they would come around the room, people would introduce themselves, and we hadn't done anything. Like, I've been involved in tons of, you know, hundreds of renovation projects. I'd never flipped a house yet. And they come to us and we're like, hey, you know, we're making offers on properties, and we would come back every week. And literally the first month, we had our first property under contract. 2 weeks later, our second property under contract. You know, we were pitching it as, you know, trying to find lenders and partners. At the time, nobody was partnering with us from that meetup group. But what's really interesting is, you know, a year later, you know, I've bought 15 houses, you know, $25 million worth of real estate. And then you have certain people that show up and they haven't done anything. They haven't made any changes. So what I get out of that is, you know, my wife and I, we're sponges. We want to learn from the people around us. We want to use those people as mentors. We ask as many questions as we can from people like yourself and figure out ways to create win-win partnerships with these people. And we've been able to be very successful doing that. You
know, I used to have clients, I would speak at, you know, some of the boards or some of the conventions, and I had a client come up to me and he's like, you're telling everyone all the secrets. Like, why are you telling everybody? He goes, you're going to make it tougher for us. I'm like, listen, the reality is that 99% of the people here are going to do nothing. That 1% is going to do something. And if they can get something out of it, great. But the reality is the people, they get stuck in their way of doing business, and that's all they know, right? Like a lot of the people that we would kind of try to mentor were real estate agents or brokers, and that model, I think, it's a completely different model, and especially now with the change in commissions, that a lot of these agents are now looking at investing. So you've got this new influx of people that have been in the real estate business but haven't really flipped a property, that are now starting to see these flips go on. And it's entertaining for me when I see these flips and people post the pictures and it's their first flip, and you can really tell it's their first flip. I remember my first flip. I almost want to go back and rehab that house because it was such a crappy job. But we flipped it, we made money, and they bought it, and I think they since remodeled it. But you look at the flips and all the kind of mistakes that they make, and that's, if I can help people avoid some of those pitfalls or some of those mistakes.
A lot of people would wonder why you would offer suggestions and give tips to somebody else. And I think that I noticed that too. I think a lot of people, that have experience it's almost like they're scared of the competition and they don't want to give away their secrets. But at the end of the day, I think by helping other people, that's how you can end up, being more successful yourself. And that allows you to create more partnerships with other people and be able to be, a mentor and a coach to someone else. And I think that's really rewarding.
One of my biggest assets is that I've seen so many transactions that I'm always like, I approach a deal this way. I first look to see if it's a deal, right? So we're looking for the higher comps, we're looking for this. And then I do the opposite. I try to kill my own deal, right? And if I don't find enough reasons to kill the deal, then I'm like, oh, all right, let's do the deal. But a lot of times when you're doing that process, you come across reasons why, like, okay, this isn't a good deal because, it's the same square footage, but I'm right next to a freeway. And how much is that discount, right? And what will the buyer's perspective? So I really try to put my buyer cap on, and what's the demographic for the buyer in the area? If I'm that buyer in that family, or if it's a single buyer or whoever the target buyer is going to be, we decorate the house and design it to complement that lifestyle. And if they're looking at other houses that are for sale in that area, what's better about mine or worse about mine, and how do we make those adjustments? So you really take on that appraisal type mentality, even more so than an appraisal, because you're looking at all of the little minutia, with one house. Okay, this house has bifold doors. Ours, we don't have the budget for bifold doors. We're going to put in, either sliders or French doors. And someone's, some buyer who's looking at another house, and that house, they're going to assess more value to that. Appliances. Are appliances high end? Are we dropping in Viking or True, or are we dropping in, GE or something, or not putting in appliances, So all of those things kind of try to come into play, with the market. It's still a business. So, you've got a budget. We're pretty good about sticking to our budgets. And a lot of times we have like our scope of work. If you're just starting, always try to get your scope of work completely 100% done with your design and everything before you start, because then you're not wondering where you're going to end up budget-wise, right? You just know, like, hey, I'm going to buy these light fixtures. They're going to cost this much money, or at the very least have a dollar amount and try to stick to that dollar amount. We're pretty good about we're almost always within, I'm going to say 5% of our budget, plus or minus. And more often than not, I think we're coming in under budget now than over budget, which is great. And as long as we're, again, not more than 5% under budget, because then that means I'm passing on deals, right? Because I'm allotting too much work, and then I should be taking on a little bit more risk. But I think that's a very, very important process for us. It helps our scope of work. It helps our contractors know what's going to happen to the project overall. It has shortened our timeframes for the remodels when everyone's on the same page. And I think that's probably one of the very, very key differences that we do. That scope of work takes us about a week to put together, but it's very, very detailed with links, specifications of, which vanity is going where do we lay out the plumbing for it, all the things that would always frustrate me when we go in and they've done the plumbing and I buy a vanity and it doesn't fit because, the drain's off by 6 inches or something, basically eliminating all of that has really, really helped the projects run smoothly. I don't have to go to them as much as I used to. They have, with the contractors, we call it the go-by. So they know in every single room, this is what's going to happen. and it's going to get this door, this doorknob, this many outlets, the walls are this color, everything's done.
A lot of people that have not gone through a lot of construction projects like we have, they're going to wonder, where do you start? How do you determine what that budget is? And the other thing I would say is, do you wait until after you have a contract on a property to do all of these details?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think you wait until you at least get the contracts on the property. It's a lot of work to do. Now we have a general one that we go by, so you can kind of, okay, it's this many square feet. We're going to allot X amount of dollars per square foot for what we're going to do. But I mean, I have a house right now that's 1,008 square feet. We're going to convert a basement into extra living space, which will pick up an extra 300 square feet, and then we're building a 400 and something square foot ADU. My total budget for it's $380,000, and you think like, wow, that's crazy high for this. But I'm going to say 70,000 of that is going into the yard space and the outdoor space. It's an eco park, so it's really trendy to have nice outdoor space. We're doing kind of a sunken fire pit and all these things to elevate the value so we can get the dollars that we want out of it. But, we also have the room to do that. Listen, if the market changes, I could dumb that down pretty significantly and get out of it for less and drop the price. But the reality is that when the buyers in that area are willing to pay for certain things. And so if you give them all those things, they're going to pay a premium. So we're trying to, in that case, since we're adding an ADU, we're going to try to maximize that opportunity. So in this case, we bought it for $772,000. We'll put $380,000 into it, and I think it's $1.7 million with upside to like $1.8 million value. So there's a good spread there, and so that type of deal that you can take the time and do, but it's also again, when you have the projects that are of that scale, you want to account for everything up front because it's very easy for that $380,000 to turn into $500,000 if you just start going crazy. I mean, we are cutting. There's things we're not doing that we should be doing, but we're fixing existing items that are already there so that we can save that money and give. Still make it profitable, but give the house as much as we can and at least have a good basis for whoever buys it to then say, okay, I want to take it to the next level and do this. And that's kind of the goal with most of our houses.
Yeah. So when you go into a project, I mean, honestly, it doesn't matter how much your renovation budget is, as long as you're increasing the value, far beyond that, right? That's how you're going to make profit. Sometimes the bigger projects, you can make a lot more money in the end. Sometimes it doesn't work out that way. I've had projects go both ways. I've had projects that I've spent, $500,000 on. They took six to 8 months to do. You sell it, for a really high price. You feel like you increase the value tremendously. You still make a profit, but at the end of the day, I had a smaller flip that I, paid $725,000 for, and sold for $1.25 million, in a day being on the market for a day. So you look at the profit. Sometimes you make more on the small projects, but I think a lot of that just comes from experience. Other thing I really want to point out and let our listeners know how crucial it is. And this takes time. And, if you find the right mentor, maybe you can have somebody help you with this, but systemizing the process is so incredibly important.
Yeah.
Construction, like you were saying, Robert, it's so easy to go over budget. It's so easy to miss something if you don't have a line item for it in advance. It brings me back to a story. I had a restaurant in Texas several years ago. I'm a serial entrepreneur and had a restaurant in Texas. And I never worked in a restaurant in my life, but my brother and I decided, hey, let's open a restaurant. It was exciting. We opened up and we hired a manager. He had been working for another chain restaurant, right? So he had been working for this other chain restaurant for 20 years as a manager. And we thought, this guy's going to be great. This guy's going to be able to help us, open multiple locations and everything. And the thing that, he worked for us, 6 months, and he was just struggling, having a really hard, 4 to 6 months. He was struggling, and he sat us down in our office, and we're like, what's going on? And he said, well, basically, when I worked for this other chain restaurant, when I would come in, I could turn off my brain. I literally didn't have to think about anything. Everything was a checkbox. Right. If this happens, you do this. If this happens, you do this. So I literally didn't have to think. And what we realized was, he wasn't someone to create and implement systems. He was somebody to follow systems.
Right.
And but I learned so much from that restaurant business, how important it is to have systems in every business you have. And I think a lot of people in real estate and a lot of people flipping houses don't have that. And every time they have to, they run into issues because it's not systemized, and they also make it very difficult on themselves. It's more time consuming. It's more stressful by not having those things in place. So,
Yeah, that's very true. I had a sales rep at Anchor, and one of the sales reps, he kept telling me, he's like, we got to drop our prices. We got to be this. And I'm like, well, if you're having the same problem over and over again, chances are it's not them, it's you, right? It's how you're approaching them. And the same thing went with systems. When we got ready to sell Anchor, one of the things that we did was we tried to take ourselves out of the business, right? Because the business isn't worth as much if we are the drivers of the business, if everything's reliant on us, right? Someone who comes in and buys it, then can't necessarily replicate that. And so we wanted to make sure that you can replicate whatever it was that we were doing without us being there. And so we started creating all the manuals and all the process, had everyone doing and revising. What we found through that process is we had so much waste that was going on because we as the owners were going in and saying, hey, we want this, do it this way. And the employees had figured out better ways to do it. And, in most cases, those better ways were just better. In some cases, it's like, no, we need you to do it this way. And there's a reason, here's the reason. And they're like, okay, we understand. And, having those processes, we kind of attribute it to like the fast food model. And the fast food model was anyone can do this job if you make the process so simple. And that's kind of what we did, is we made the process so simple that yes, we had more employees, but everything ran like clockwork. And it does become much easier when you hit a certain level. Now you do have to grind out that first part, right? Like I forgot how difficult that for those first few years were and how much work you do. But if you grind that out, you can basically cruise control for, as long as you're not continually in growth mode, but you can, put it on cruise control and just maintain that for a while. One of the things, I just had a conversation with, one of the companies that I'm not going to say the name, but it's a very, very well-known kind of company in the real estate business. And I ran into them at a networking place, and I said, "So what's the exit? You're killing it. You're doing great." He's like, "Oh, I don't know. I think we're going to maybe expand to." I'm like, "You're just creating more work. What's the exit?" And until we thought of things as an exit strategy, then the systems become more important, right? When it's almost very difficult when you're making a lot of money to step away and then look at the business and say, okay, objectively, how can I make this better? Because you're making money and you're thinking everything's working. And, I consult with other hard money lenders and other kind of, I'll call them more development type flippers that are doing a scale. And one of the things that I see is especially with the hard money guys, is how much money they're leaving on the table for the benefit of ease of operation. And when they're looking to then exit or monetize or raise more money, the companies that have lent money to a lot of these hard money lenders, what happens is that they look at certain metrics, and these guys don't have those metrics in place. And it's the same thing with flip investors. When they don't have these KPIs or these, how do you judge success? Is it because you made money on a property? That's not necessarily the great way to judge success. I do everything on yield. Like going back when you were saying it, the larger rehab, maybe it's not worth it because you made so much money. And there's times where we've made more money and looked at it and it's like, wow, that wasn't really worth it. We should have just done this. And our yield would have been better because we're in and out in 90 days instead of the 7 or 8 months it might take for a bigger rehab. And so I analyze all of the projects, 3 different ways. What can I sell it for if I just get it to a financeable state? Because that's really where most of the value is added, right? We're taking houses that are not financeable, and so they can't qualify for conventional mortgages because of whatever, a roof leak, the condition, torn carpet, whatever it is. And then we get it to a financeable state. And there's a very small margin there, but you're making that money very, very quickly. In other cases, there's that mid-tier, right? Okay, well, let's fix it up a little bit nicer, and it'll sell for this much money, right? Or if you take it all the way, then it's going to sell for this much money. And there's the time value of money, there's your investment, the risk of the marketplace, the timing, right? Like if I'm doing the bigger rehabs and I'm starting them in October, November, and I know I'm going to sell them in, let's say, in April or May, okay, that's a great time to hit the market. But if I'm buying stuff in April or May and that's a bigger rehab, and now I'm going to sell it in November, December, January, I might strongly look at other ways to do that, because what most people don't realize is everyone looks at these year-over-year numbers that Case-Shiller puts out, right? And it's okay, it's March to March, it's June to June, but intra the year, there's a flux of value that happens, and it's usually somewhere between a 5 to 7% gain or loss. And so if you can time it, you're almost, the market can fix a lot of your mistakes. And that's what I see a lot of problems with a lot of, especially beginning flippers, is that they make money and they think they did well, but it was the market that actually like did well for them. And that's not being a successful investor. That's almost speculating. So I don't like to speculate. I'm very conservative on things. I like to see that we're going to make money, and I value things. I don't look at one ARV. I look at like, okay, this is our safe number, this is our expectation, and this is the upside. And depending on when we hit the markets, we adjust all three of those so we can correctly analyze the risk that we're doing. I've always done the same thing, even when I'm a lender, because I'm also a lender. I'm a private investor for a lot of people. And when we're looking at those transactions, I look at what their profit is going to be based on that, and we'll have a dialogue about like what it is, and they'll say, well, what about this comp? And okay, if it's a longer term project, that comp's not going to be there. You're going to be at the lull of the marketplace and not at the peak of the marketplace when this one sold or that one sold, especially when the interest rates change quickly. All of those comps that were, within the comp 90-day window, all of a sudden they were, 2 percentage points cheaper. That was a value you really couldn't use. I mean, that was the riskiest part of the market, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah. So if somebody calls you and says, hey, Robert, I want you to analyze this deal for me. Tell me, is this a good deal? Is this not a good deal? What are going to be those key factors that you're going to look at to determine if you think it's a good property to flip?
Yeah. So I look at, obviously, purchase price, rehab, and ARV are the three main ones. But location, timing of the market, I will say experience of their team. I help a lot of people kind of build their teams out so that it becomes a little bit more automated. But, these are all risk factors, what reserves they've got, how they put together their scope of work. All of these things, kind of come together, and they have to either work really well together or not. And if they don't, if there's more pitfalls, then I assess more risk to it from an investor standpoint.
So personally, if you're going to flip if you're looking for a house to flip right now, do you have like a minimum like profit like per project, or you're like not going to mess with it?
Yeah. For me, it's, so if we're paying cash, it's about between 18 and 20% as a profit margin. If it's leveraged, it's going to be about 10% right now. And, so net to sales, so net to the ARV. So our net after all of the costs would be versus the after repair value. So if it's $2 million house, we have to net 200,000. And that's kind of the way I would look at it on a leverage type transaction. On a non-leverage, then obviously that kind of doubles, because right now I think it's running about half. For like, I know when I write a loan, I'm somewhere between 9 and 11% for most people, and half a point to 2 points on the high side, depending on what it is and what the project is and how involved I think I might have to be, or if they're going to need help. That's really kind of what you look for, right?
So you've obviously been involved in construction. You've been very involved in lending to other investors, and flipping houses yourself. Like, what are you most passionate about after doing everything? What do you enjoy the most right now?
Oh God, that's a great question. I don't know. I really like the business, right? And I think the biggest fun part, or at least that I have the most fun with, is taking a deal that a lot of people have passed on and spotting an opportunity there that people missed. There's a deal that we're doing in Los Feliz right now that was put out by one of the major wholesalers that's out there, and they just missed the opportunity. So we bought it, tweaked what the process was going to be for it a little bit, and a house that, there might be $1 million in profit on a house flip.
That's crazy.
That everyone just missed.
Wait, so did you guys hear that? So Robert's talking that there's potential to make $1 million profit on a property. You can't do that in every market. Obviously we lived in an area with high-end homes. But that's what I love about real estate is like, we're talking about, tens, hundreds, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars in potential profit, or even into the millions, depending on what type of property that you're doing, which is really cool.
Well, the funny thing is this is only a $2.4 million house. So $1 million of that might be profit. That's like net profit, not even like, hey, gross sales like you see on HGTV. Hey, they bought it for this and they made this, but no, that's not how it works. This is like, I'm talking net. And we're like, wow, that's just crazy that everybody passed on this deal.
Sometimes those are the best ones, though.
Right.
Like there was a property in Woodland Hills, California, as well that it was on a flag lot. Honestly, I pitched it to multiple potential investor partners, different lenders, and several people turned me down. They're like, no, like it's a flag lot, too risky, whatever. that's honestly was one of my most profitable deals. We made over 300,000 profit on this one flip, in about 4 months. And we ended up selling it to a celebrity that's on a TV show on Netflix, a real estate related TV show on Netflix, which is crazy, that this person, they chose our house, and, we did something right, obviously. And so it's really rewarding to be able to basically prove other people wrong and also be successful at the same time.
Yeah, it's funny with flag lots. Like as a lender, I never really liked them. As a flipper, if you set it up right and you market it, there's a lot of people that like that privacy. And so it's interesting you mentioned you sold it to a celebrity client because they value privacy and they're willing to pay more for it.
And little things like we actually added like an automated, gate at the front and things, and that was several $1,000s for those things. And again, I think a lot of flippers just try to be, too cheap on everything.
Right.
And they don't do the bifold doors on these high-end homes. They do a slider and then whatever. And yes, sometimes the numbers don't work to do the bifold doors, but we're currently sitting in a property that is one of our renovations we're almost finished with, has 2 bifold doors. I mean, $35,000, $40,000 for these doors. Like a lot of people are you ever going to get your money back? Are you going to get that investment back with a return? And I mean, I would say 100% yes.
Right.
Sometimes it's not about making more profit. It's about selling the property fast. It's about having the wow factor when somebody walks in and selling it. Maybe there's 2 or 3 houses in the same neighborhood, and one house has the bifold doors, one doesn't. And so it's a lot about lifestyle and things like that. But I think adding those extra things matter a lot. One other real quick thing I want to ask you about is, you were talking about having things systemized and having, like a lot of your finishes already pre-picked out for properties and stuff. Mm-hmm. So do you do every property the same, or is that just like your baseline and then you'll find ways to be creative with each property?
So I will say that we change up just about every house, and we try to design the house out for the house that we've got. There's some things that we redo 100%, right? But I'm not doing as big of a volume as I used to. Before we were flipping, say 300 to 500 houses a year.
That's
right?
crazy.
But a lot of them were very short, like just get it financed. We were buying a trustee sale, and you're quick in and out. And some of them we were just buying a trustee sale, selling to our clients, and it fed our loan business. When you look at that type of model, you have to have, like we had basically, I want to say it was 4 different looks or maybe 5 different looks. And then within each look, there were 3 different tiers. It was the low-end tier, the mid-tier, or the high-end tier version of it. So one of them might have the $600 faucets. The cheap version might have the Amazon $26 faucet. And the overall look was the same, but some of the finishes that were more refined got elevated. Like, let's say you'd have in a mid-tier, you might have the laminate flooring. In a high-end, you might have, engineered wood or solid wood. Mm-hmm. And so those buyers are kind of maybe more accustomed and they notice some of these differences. So we would cater to that. The landscaping was basically the same plants, but the pots were smaller, right? And whereas on the higher end flips, the pots were a little bit more mature, so the landscaping looked like it was, there for a little bit longer.
Yeah.
So you can have the same looks, but if you're doing that on scale, you have to have that. Right. And then you have to buy the materials and have it on hand because you start to run low. And then if you run low, it's hard to kind of get them and wait and search. And that's a whole nother process. Yeah.
And I think so much of it is just like understanding your particular market and the particular neighborhood. And it's really not that hard for anybody to figure this out. With free tools, online, you literally can go see what comps are in neighborhoods, what other properties are selling for. You can see tons of photos of other properties, of, the ones that recently sold. So you can really quickly figure out what buyers are looking for in that neighborhood. Right. And one thing I like to do is just, maybe everything else is pretty much the same, but do something different, like it doesn't have to be bifold doors, but it can be maybe an accent, color on a wall, or just do something that makes your property stand out.
Right.
It could be the front door or something with the landscaping, just something to set yourself apart from other people. We're currently renovating some properties in Palm Springs. Again, like it's a very different market. You have to cater to those really, bold colors, very unique types of design, more of the mid-century modern. Right. So I think and what's interesting is, we'll walk into a house a flipper did, and they didn't take those things into consideration, and it's bland, it's plain, it doesn't fit the market, and that house will sit there, and it's literally costing that investor, thousands of dollars per month, and it's over just maybe just paint colors that's not that expensive.
So I'm sure you get the feeling when you're getting close to being done, you're like, you start walking through the house, it's like, oh yeah, I get it. I feel the house. You feel like the vibe that you created, and you see it all start to come together. That's one of the things that we've always tried to do, is that when we design a house out, we try to have that feel when people are walking through that. Let's say if they're looking at other homes that other investors did, they don't know why they like our house better, but they like our house better, right? And it started with something as simple like, I noticed you did all new baseboards here, right? A lot of investors, when I got started, they wouldn't change out the baseboards. They wouldn't change out the trim or the doors or things along those lines. And, when you're walking through a house, a lot of people, like the baseboards, you don't really look at. But it's something that gives you a nice, clean feel when it's the clean square edge versus the older, kind of design that they had. And it just gives you a different feel for the home. And so we try to pick things that, again, we go towards whatever lifestyle of that demographic for that buyer is that we've decided. But we try to give them things that when they're walking through, that it looks really good. I mean, there's some things that we do with I'll share a couple things. Mirrors. Mirrors are a big plus. Mirror doors, if you're closet doors, a lot of people don't like them. We like them because we employ the department store trick, right? And so we want you to look the best that you possibly can at our house. So our doors aren't straight. They're angled slightly.
Interesting.
And so they're angled just slightly less on the bottom because it makes you look thinner.
Oh, wow.
And so when people are walking through the houses and they feel good, I can't tell you at open houses how many people just pause and they stop and they check themselves out. And it's basically an old Broadway got in trouble for doing it was their mirrors in their changing rooms were changed out at the bottom. If you look at Nordstrom's mirrors, they still do that.
Oh, wow.
The mirrors hang at an angle. And it's because you look better in your clothing and whatever when you have that angle. So we learned from that, and we're like, oh well, let's do the same thing, and kind of employ one of those. It's a subconscious level, but if you feel better about yourself in our house, that's gonna transfer to you liking our house better.
Yeah, that's a really cool trick. I've never heard that before. Robert, you've given us so much good information. Again, you have so much experience, way more experience than I do. I look up to you tremendously.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you being on the show. One of the things I would definitely want to let our listeners know is how can they connect with you? How can they follow you? How can they find you? How can they work with you?
Sure. Yeah, I'm on Instagram and Facebook. Instagram, it's at Robert Fragoso Jr. or Robert, I think it's _Fragoso _Jr. And it's just JR for Jr. is the best way to probably reach out to me via text message. I have a search number that kind of goes to either myself or my assistant, and that's 949-572-4468. If I can help, I love helping people. I love networking and meeting new people and really guiding them through their journey of investing, just like I was.
That's awesome, Robert. Again, thank you so much for being on the show. I definitely want to have you back on because I feel like we could just go on for hours talking, but I don't want to keep you forever. Thank you so much for being here. Again, this is the Flip My Future podcast. I'm your host, Bradley Dorsey. Today we had an awesome guest, Robert Fragoso, and super excited to have him here. And if you like the show, definitely click the like button, follow us, give us a 5-star review. We sure would appreciate it. We're a relatively new show, and we want to be able to help a lot of people. We're passionate about real estate. We're passionate about helping others, and we want to help you too.
Thank you for tuning in to the Flip My Future podcast. We hope you found today's episode insightful and inspiring. Remember that whether you're a seasoned investor or just starting out, the journey to financial freedom begins with taking action. Be sure to subscribe for more actionable tips and expert advice on flipping houses and building wealth. Together, let's flip your future and unlock your full potential. Until next time, take care and happy flipping.